Hi, my name is Steve Lee. I run the 3% Project. The 3% Project mobilizes 1 million students across Canada and 500 high schools to ask the question, what kind of future do we want? And we explore the topics of climate change and sustainability and how they can develop and gain the skills they need to create that kind of future, a future that's more inclusive, fair, prosperous, and sustainable. We mobilize 1 million students in 500 high schools, particularly located in remote, rural, conservative, and resource-based communities. Cities like here, Toronto, have those resources. Young people do have those resources and teachers who know how to teach it. Most rural communities and resource-based communities, they don't have, if any, opportunities to really be engaged in this kind of narrative. And so that's what I do. And what I want to talk about here mainly with you is to think about what kind of future do you want? What kind of future does your sector intend to help create? What is your story? And what is the narrative of clean tech here in Canada around the world? Because I don't think that message, if it exists, is known to the larger kind of zeitgeist moment of our generation or the larger public. Even the phrase clean tech is not very well known. Maybe people know renewable energy, but it's not all that well known. And particularly, its benefits are not very well known. People don't choose to do something because of what it is or how easy it is to do. People do it because they like the why. What benefit does this exactly have for me? And I don't think that's exactly known out there. The author of Petit Prince, he talks about how if you want people to go build ships, don't break them up into teams and send them into forests to cut wood to make ship. Take them to the sea and let them admire the longing vastness of the sea, and they'll build the ship themselves. And every time I go to these kind of conferences to learn about the topic and to network, and I find that people complain all the time that our customers and our sector and market doesn't really understand the benefits of how amazing the clean tech sector is. And that's again and again what I hear as one of the systemic barriers in this field, but no one's really going out there and telling that story. What is the narrative here for the future of clean tech? And Canada is a country of many, many narratives. It is incredibly diverse, and as I've traveled from coast to coast to coast, I visited over 300 schools and over 250 towns that I physically visited and talked to people. And Canada is really, really, really big and diverse. And I mean, the community of Tuktoyaktuk, for example, right on the Arctic Ocean in Northwest Territories, they've experienced already over 6 Celsius degrees of warming. Several houses and roads are already underwater due to coastal erosion. The entire community is expected to be under the water within the next 32 years. They don't have Arctic char anymore in the Arctic. The ice for the Arctic is supposed to melt starting June, and it fully melts around August, and that's when they know for the summer to have arrived. And beluga whale usually arrives by the time it's August. This year, all of the sea ice melted by June 3rd, and the beluga whale returned by June 4th. That's not normal. Or another community of northern Alberta, of Garden Creek, a remote community of Indigenous people who don't really speak English much. The entire community speaks Cree, and they try to go renewable, and similarly to Fort Chipewyan, communities have been, as one of the chiefs have told me, they've been held as economic and environmental hostages to go with industrial partners that government only places before them. If they don't, they have no other options. Or communities that I go into, post-mining communities or forestry communities in rural areas that are really designed to extract the raw materials so that we could have served our lords over in Britain. Canada was largely set up as a colony in the beginning, and Western Canada was developed to serve Eastern Canada to serve the colony over in Britain. And I don't think Canada really graduated from the mindset of a colony to extract raw materials as cheaply as we can and then export it to around the world, but really in a limited market. And clean tech sector is something that could change that narrative. I don't know if that narrative exists. And this is something that I find again and again something kind of confusing as I go around and talk about the benefits of renewable energy and how the communities could go transfer into that. That kind of idea doesn't really exist outside of cities and these small bubbles of clean tech and sustainability sectors. I've been at the forefront of kind of receiving the other universe of facts in other parts of the country that operate on a whole different idea of what environment and climate change and oil and gas and clean sector is. Just yesterday, apparently, my photo was largely blown up into one of the screens during the Wexit rally in Edmonton because I'm Hitler. That's indoctrinating their children, which is many of the letters that I receive. And yeah, the idea of why we need to transition into this kind of future is not very well advertised. It's not told. The story doesn't really exist. But we know those stories. We know why we want to move towards this kind of inclusive, fair, prosperous, and sustainable future, not only to avoid some of the calamities, but because it is substantially better future than we have. It is substantially more economical. It is substantially better for the future generations. We have all these ideas. If you were to close your eyes and imagine what 2050 that's fully decarbonized and electrified should look like, I bet you could imagine that. But most people around Canada cannot imagine that. Then the ask to give up the life that they've known, that their parents and grandparents had in their community, to transition to something else is a very difficult ask. And when these stories are largely told only in bubbles of the large cities, then the rural communities really do feel that someone's out there to get us. I've never heard of these stories. I've never heard of these information or the statistics. And here's big city people talking about something completely different, and these changes are happening all to me without any of my knowledge or input or my engagement. And that's not really fair either. So what is that story for the clean tech sector? And I would challenge each and one of you to really think about what story does clean tech want to tell, and to actually tell those stories, not just within the sector, but to largely outside. I don't know how you're going to do that because the clean tech sector is largely a bunch of small players that are really trying to get their products off the market and scale and all of these things. And I don't exactly know how we're going to do that, but it has to be done. It has to be done. Otherwise, there's a whole different universe of facts and information and whole kinds of logic that's built on different facts that are saying that this sector is harmful to them, that it's threatening to them, and that this is all made up by elites in the cities. And we know that not to be true, then we have to tell our stories. And then probably equally important, we have to spend that time listening to the other side. I think that's an exercise that's been lost, the art that's been lost over time. Canada is not a natural state of how people would organize ourselves. This is an exercise, an experiment that we've invested to do. Then we have to actually continue to invest in that narrative. And that means not only do we need to tell our stories, but we also need to listen to their stories, actually have meaningful dialogues, and try to, as much as we can, empathize with their stories as well. So what would be your story and the story of the future of clean tech? Thank you.